My daughter-in-law told me, "You're too old to live here. Pack your things and go." My son just stared at his phone. I didn't fight back. I just walked to the garage. 5 minutes later, the police arrived at the door. What they found in my trunk stunned the whole neighborhood. My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 68 years old. I have soft gray hair that I twist into a bun when I am nervous. I wear thick glasses to read and a faded blue cardigan that smells like lemon soap. People in the neighborhood call me Maggie because they think it sounds friendlier than Margaret. I have lived a long life. I have loved, lost, and learned to be kind even when people were not kind back to me. The day everything changed began with a single sentence. "You're too old to live here. Pack your things and go." Emily said it like she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. Her voice was cold and small and full of hunger for something that was not mine. She was my daughter-in-law. She stood in the kitchen holding a plate like it was a shield. Her eyes were sharp, and her hair was pulled tight in a perfect ponytail. She was 32 and always smelled like expensive shampoo. She had the kind of smile that looked pretty in pictures and mean in real life. My son, Michael, sat at the kitchen table with his phone resting on the table like a curtain between us. He did not look up. He did not say a word. He was 35 and had his father's hands and my stubborn mouth. He stared at the small light on the phone as if it had all the answers. He was not mad. He was not kind. He was quiet, like a man who did not want to choose between two fires because both would burn him. I did not fight. I did not raise my voice or cry. I surprised myself by how calm I felt. Maybe because I had practiced being calm for many years when life knocked the wind out of me. Maybe because the truth of what Emily was saying had sunk in for a long time and finally made room for action. My hands moved without thinking. I walked out of the house with my small suitcase. I went to the garage. Outside, the air smelled like rain even though the sun had been out all day. I sat in my old car and closed the door. The engine hummed awake like a tired animal. I breathed. I told myself it was okay. I had lived alone before I moved back in to help after Michael's first divorce. I could live alone again. I had money tucked away in a small account and a friend named Rosa who had an empty room. I had photos, a plant on the kitchen window, and a life still waiting. 5 minutes later, loud voices rose at the front door. I heard a heavy thud and a voice I knew from the radio, the kind of voice that orders and is obeyed. Footsteps, then more footsteps. At the edge of my vision through the garage glass, I saw uniforms moving like slow, determined waves across the lawn. Someone in the house called my name. My son's voice, thin and high. My heart shook. I thought, maybe they would go inside and calm Emily down. Maybe someone called for help by mistake. Maybe this was only a dark moment that would pass. Then a neighbor's car stopped at the curb. A hush fell across the street. People stepped out on their porches and looked over the hedges. I could see their faces in the small square of driveway light, curiosity, fear, and that quick, hot thing that makes people watch someone else's life like a movie. I turned the key in the car, but I did not leave. Part of me wanted to drive away and forget the house forever. Another part wanted to stay and see what would happen. I was tired of being pushed around. I was tired of being made to feel small. The front door opened. Voices floated to the garage, neighbors whispering, the rhythm of shoes on wood. I heard the stern voice again. "We need to check the trunk." The sentence landed in my chest like a pebble in a glass. The uniforms wrapped the words in authority. I felt a sudden cold sweep over me even though the summer heat pressed at the garage door. They came out to the driveway and walked over to my car. I climbed out slowly, my suitcase in hand. The officer walked up to me. He did not look angry or kind, just serious. He asked my name, and when I said Margaret Hayes, he nodded like he had heard stories, but not the whole one. He asked if the car was mine. It was. He asked if he could open the trunk. I stood very still and watched. I wanted to tell Michael to stop staring at his phone and to look at what he had done. I wanted to tell Emily that being cruel does not make you brave. I wanted to tell the officers that nothing in that trunk was dangerous, that it was only old boxes and my knitting needles and the little wooden bird my mother carved for me. But a stranger's hand reached for the latch and lifted it with a slow, official move. The trunk lid rose. A crowd held its breath. The air trembled. The officers looked inside, and their faces turned into masks of something else: shock, surprise, and a kind of respect that lives in the gap between a life lived honestly and a lie neat as a well-folded shirt. They took out one thing, then another, and set them carefully on the driveway like they were treasures. People gasped. Emily cried out a name, then covered her mouth with her hands. Michael's phone slipped from his fingers and hit the porch with a small, dark sound. I could hear someone 2 houses down whisper, "Oh my God." The police officer who had opened the trunk stepped back as if he had seen a ghost who smiled back at him. I did not speak. I only watched the faces of the people I loved and the people I had barely met. They were changed. The quiet in the street was the kind of silence that comes when a secret has been opened like a book and everyone realizes they are reading the same page at once. "What is that?" someone asked. It was a neighbor I knew, Mrs. Allen, a tall woman with a broom in her hand who always complained about weeds. She looked small now. "Is that real?" That was when the sirens came, a distant whoop that rushed down the street and made the windows rattle. I thought the noise would drown everything out, but it only made the scene more real, like a heart beating in a chest the size of a town. They called for me to come to the front step. I walked slowly, palms sweating. Emily met me halfway with eyes like knives. She shouted my name and said words I did not like, but I did not fight back. My son still stared at his phone. He did not look at me. He had not yet raised his eyes to the truth. That hurt worse than any insult. The police officer asked me questions. He asked me where I had gotten the things in the trunk. He asked me why I had them. People listened. I answered in my small voice. I told the truth that I thought would explain everything, but the truth stretched unevenly like a torn cloth. The officer's face softened and then hardened. He asked Michael a question, and Michael's face finally lifted from the phone. For the first time that day, he looked like my son again, confused, scared, unsure where the line of love ended and the line of betrayal began. Someone in the crowd shouted my name. The words criminal and evidence flew like birds and landed hard on the sidewalk. I wanted to shout back, "No, you're wrong." But my voice was too small to reach the street. And then someone else, someone I had never met, said something softer. "She looks like my aunt." That small kindness was like a warm towel on a cold morning. It reminded me that not everyone wanted to divide the world into winners and losers. Some people still looked for the right thing, the kind thing, the human thing. They asked me to open my suitcase, and I did. Inside were clothes, a few photographs, and a stained recipe book that had my mother's handwriting inside. These were ordinary things. They would not make a neighborhood gasp. They were pieces of a life. But beside these was a small sealed envelope with a note that read, "For when the world forgets how to be fair." It had my initials on it. I had written it years ago and forgotten. I took it out and tucked it back in without thinking. A policeman knelt down and looked at something on the ground. He picked it up gently. It was a piece of paper folded into a triangle like a soldier's hat. On it were letters I had never imagined would land in my hands again. He read them, and his eyebrows moved in a way that said someone had undone a long knot of wrongness. The crowd shifted as if they could hear a clock ticking faster. I remembered the day the letters had begun. It was the day my husband, Tom, had died. He was gone for nearly a decade now. He was a quiet man who loved me in the way a lighthouse loves the shore, steady, patient, and always there when the storm came. Before he died, he had helped me with many things. He had also, years ago, put away a few secrets to protect people he loved. He thought he was protecting us. But sometimes keeping a secret is the same as telling a lie by silence. For years after Tom died, I kept to myself. Michael had moved to the city and lived his life. He came back sometimes, usually for holidays. When his second marriage did not work, he moved back in. I helped with meals, with quiet words, and with fixing the leaking sink. Emily moved in soon after. At first, she smiled at me like a sweet storm. She helped with groceries and pretended to like my casseroles. But as the months passed, I saw a change. Her smile became a tool. She would laugh at the things I said, and then tell Michael that I was forgetful, that I took up space, that I held us back. She would move my things to different rooms and say, "I am just trying to keep the house neat, Mom." Only when I found a pair of my earrings in the trash did I understand that she did not mean well. Kindness can be a heavy thing when people misuse it. I kept being kind. I kept standing in the doorway while my things disappeared into boxes marked donate. I kept making quiet dinners. I let Michael think I was content because I did not want to be the trouble his life needed. I thought love meant holding my tongue. It does not. Love should sometimes be the loudest thing in the room. Weeks before the day in the garage, I noticed Emily talking on the phone with a voice that was not hers. She would say, "Yes, soon. The house will be sold. We will get the money." She told Michael about a plan to change the locks. She told someone else that if I was difficult, they would find a place for me. One night, I heard her say into the phone, "She doesn't know her own bank accounts. She can't fight." She smiled when she hung up. That smile had been the last warm thing I saw before the day the trunk opened. I had been saving for a small apartment nearby. It was not much. It had a window that looked out to a maple tree and a sun that would come in and touch the floor in the morning. I had opened an account and put away a little bit of money each month, Aleki nickels and a few dollars. When I had a feeling that someone might try to take our home, I began to keep important papers in my car for safekeeping: the house deed, a letter from Tom, and photographs that linked me to the life my husband and I had built. I did this without telling anyone because I did not want to fight. I had decided to leave when I needed to, quietly and with my dignity. But I did not expect the police. I did not expect them to know or to be called. When the crowd grew and the officers opened my trunk, I realized someone had told them things I had not told. I wondered who would call the police for an old woman who had done nothing wrong. I wondered who would decide to unravel my life like yarn. The answer mattered less than the way it made me feel: betrayed, watched, and small. At the very center of the pile the officers pulled from the trunk sat a small wooden box. It was carved with tiny stars and a little bird. Tom had made it when we were new to the house, a gift for our first Christmas together. The officers placed it on a sheet of cardboard, then one of them carefully lifted the lid. Inside sat a faded ribbon, a handful of old coins, and a narrow stack of letters tied with string. The officers did not shout. They read slowly. They read names and dates and signatures that made the air change. People around us started talking faster, voices overlapping. I knew she was hiding something. She looked guilty. Maybe she's been stealing. But then someone else said, "Those letters, they look old." An older man stepped forward and squinted at a date. "My God," he said. "Those are from the 70s. It was at that point that Emily did something I did not expect. She planted both palms on her hips and laughed, a sharp little sound. "Letters," she said. "From the 70s? What does that even mean?" "Mom kept old junk. That's all." Her laughter was meant to cut the moment in two and discard the part that belonged to my husband and me. Michael finally lifted his eyes then. He closed the phone with a small, decisive snap and walked over. For a moment I thought he was going to take my hand and say he was sorry. Instead, he looked at the box and then at me and then at Emily. The color in his face left like someone had turned off a light. "Why did you hide these?" he asked me. His voice was not cruel. It was the voice of a child asking a parent a question that was supposed to be simple. I wanted to say, to keep them safe. I wanted to say, because I love this house and the memory of your father, and I did not want anyone to take that away from me. But my answer came out hollow. It came out small. The officer who had opened the trunk shook his head slowly. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice now soft and careful, "these letters, they contain names and signatures that suggest there are more people than we thought involved in certain things. We need to look into this." The words landed like a bell. Heads turned. Emily's face lost its color. She stepped back. Michael's jaw clenched. The neatness in the world we had known split open like an old seam. Someone whispered about court cases, about old debts, about names that had been forgotten. The hush that followed was thick, like fog. Then something else happened, something I did not see coming. A car door slammed. A voice I did not recognize shouted from down the road. The neighbors began pulling out their phones to record. In the middle of all of it, Emily covered her face and sobbed. Her sobs were loud and not like the soft, controlled voice I had heard before. They were real, messy, and full of fear. Michael crossed his arms and looked at the house like he had been betrayed by the furniture inside it. The police placed a tape around the front yard. They asked me to sit on the porch while they took statements. I sat on the old wood chair that had belonged to my mother and tried to calm my breathing. My hands shook so much the pen in my fingers drew crooked lines across the paper. I tried to remember the names of the people who had once helped us, of the lawyer Tom had trusted, of places I had put certain things for safekeeping. Memory is a funny thing. It holds some images sharp and others like water. As the sun slid lower and the sky turned the color of old gold, the streetlights came on. The officers closed the trunk again and covered the boxes with a cloth. They wrote things on clipboards and spoke softly into their radios. The world felt heavy around me, like the night had wrapped its arms over my shoulders. Someone in the crowd said the word scandal, and it blew over the street like wind pushing leaves. I did not know what a scandal meant for my family, for my son, for my friends. I only knew this. The life I had been living in this house was changing in a way I had not chosen. The truth had been a quiet thing for a long time, and when it finally spoke it did so loud enough to wake an entire neighborhood. The officers finished writing and closed their notebooks. They told me they would have to take a copy of the letters for investigation. I asked if I could come with them. I wanted to see what they had found and why it had made so many eyes go cold. The officer looked at me, and for the first time his face showed something like sympathy. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "for now, we need to keep the scene intact. We'll let you know what happens next." I walked back to my car and opened the trunk one last time. My hands hovered over the boxes. I reached inside and touched the wooden bird Tom had whittled. The grain of the wood was smooth from years of holding it. I thought about all the small things that make a life: teacups, a coat left on a chair, a bed made with a quilt. I thought about kindness and how quickly it can be mistaken for weakness. Behind me, on the porch, Emily called out something that sounded like an accusation and an apology at once. Michael put his phone in his pocket and stood between us like a man trying to hold two storms apart. The crowd began to thin as people went home to make dinner or to watch the news. But a few stayed, their faces lit by the blue light from their cars, because human beings find it hard to stop watching when the world spills into the street. I sat in my car as the house settled into a silence that was heavier than the night. The key in the ignition felt like a small bright thing that might still lead me away. I thought about going. I thought about staying. I thought about the letter I had tucked back into my suitcase with my mother's handwriting inside. I had promised myself I would never let my life be taken by people who did not care for my heart. I had promised to be brave enough to ask for what I needed. And then, before I could decide, a sound rose from the porch, a scream, quick and high. The officer on the porch shouted for people to move back. Emily's voice broke and she ran, not away from the house, but away from something else. Michael stepped forward and the officer rushed to his side. The neighbors gasped and turned their phones back toward the house. I did not know what had happened. I only knew that the night was no longer just an ending to the day. Something had shifted. The police moved faster. I left the car and walked toward the porch because my feet moved like they had a mind of their own. The scene was sudden and loud and full of people's small breathless noises. On the front step, Emily stood with her hands over her mouth. Michael had his hand on the small wooden box, the letters peeking out like questions. The officer reached for his radio and said, "We need backup." What happened next was the kind of thing a person remembers like a flash of lightning. Someone in the crowd pointed to the trunk of my car. Someone else shouted, "Open it." The tape fluttered. The officers looked at one another and then at me. I looked down at the trunk and realized I had no idea what the night would bring. I thought about all the choices that had led me here, my quiet saving, my small acts of kindness, my decision to leave when I needed to, and wondered if any of them had prepared me for the noise that was about to come. They moved to the trunk again, hands trembling slightly this time. The hush that followed was different from the hush before the box had been opened. It was full of a new kind of fear and expectation. People leaned forward. Michael closed his eyes for a second and then opened them and looked straight at me. His face was tight. He mouthed a word I could not hear. The officer reached for the latch and pulled. The trunk lid rose once more into the evening air. The trunk was already open when the officer reached inside again. The night air held the smell of cut grass and the small heat left from a summer day. People leaned forward on their porches and hushed like they were in a church. My heart beat fast and loud in my chest. I wanted to tell myself to breathe slowly, but my breath came quick anyway. The officer pulled out a small wooden box first. It was the one Tom had made. Then he found a stack of envelopes tied with string. He set them on the driveway like they were pieces of a broken promise. Each envelope had a name on it in my husband's handwriting. Some had the name of a neighbor. Others had names I had not thought about in years. The officer opened one and read. It was a bank deposit slip. Another had a small folded paper with numbers on it. The third had a receipt for a payment. The fourth had a note that said, "If anything happens to me, tell them this is real." A woman near the fence began to cry softly. Michael had his hands pressed over his mouth and his ears red. Emily stood frozen, like a statue that had been touched by cold water. "That's junk," she said once, but her voice wiggled like a loose wire. The officers did not laugh. They looked at the papers as if they were measuring something heavy. Then one of them found the small recorder. It was old, black, and looked like it had been used a lot. There was a little label on it in faded ink, "Play when suspicious." The officer hesitated and then pressed the tiny red button. At first, there was only a soft hiss like far-off rain. Then a voice came through. The voice was small and rough and lined with time. It was Tom's voice. Everyone went very quiet. Even the crickets seemed to stop listening. "Listen," Tom said plainly. "If I am gone, this is for Maggie. I kept these records because I feared someone would try to move us out. I am not afraid to name them if I must. If they try to take our house, tell them what you hear." The tape clicked and a new voice came in. It was younger, sharp and smooth, and very much like Emily's. I felt my skin go cold. She sounded like she was practicing. The words were short and careful. "Yes, as soon as he is gone, we will file for the deed change. I will handle the lawyer. I will make sure she signs the paper. She can't remember things. She won't know." I could not move. I heard the neighbors rustling their shirts like they were trying to see better. Michael's face had become a white thing. He looked like someone caught in a sudden storm with no umbrella. He stared at the recorder and then at Emily and then at me. For a moment, his whole body trembled. I saw the look of a man trying to find a place to stand on shifting sand. The officer stopped the tape. He looked up and around at the faces in the dark. This is serious," he said. "We need to take this as evidence." He put the recorder in a plastic bag with careful hands, like he was handling something fragile. The bag made a tiny crinkle noise that sounded loud in the quiet. Emily began to cry properly then, the soft, wet sound of someone who had lost control. She fell to her knees and pressed her hands to her face. I did not move to help her. I could not. I had to make my own heart keep beating in a world that suddenly felt like glass and could shatter. Someone in the crowd called out, "You planned this," and the shout made Emily rock back on her heels and gasp. Michael's phone was forgotten on the porch. He bent and picked it up like a man who had found something he hoped would change everything. He scrolled and scrolled, his thumb moving fast. Then he looked up and his eyes were full of questions that had edges. The officers asked us to stand back. The detective who had arrived pulled a small notebook out of his pocket and wrote fast. He asked for names and dates. He wanted to know about bank accounts, lawyers, and any meetings that had happened. People spoke. The older neighbors told things about Emily's going and coming at odd hours. A young man said he had seen her with a man in a suit near the bank. The detective made a note of everything and said he would check cameras and records. I felt like I was watching my life in a movie where every close-up was of the parts one had hidden: the money box in my closet, the extra key to the study, the quiet meetings with the bank manager years ago. I had not told anyone about those things because I thought they were ordinary, small armor against storms. Now they were evidence. Now they were weapons and shields at the same time. Michael finally pulled himself together and walked to me. He stood so close that I could smell the toothpaste on his breath. He looked like he had not slept in days. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" I could only look at him. I had wanted to tell him many times. I had wanted to say, "I kept these for us, for when the world turned unkind." But I had thought he was busy. I had thought he would worry. I had thought I should not make his life harder. That was a mistake. I wanted to protect our home, I said finally. I thought I could keep things safe until the right time. The words tasted old and thin. He looked at the boxes on the driveway. Why the recorder? He asked. Why the notes? I swallowed and remembered Tom's small hands shaping the wood bird, how he had chewed on a pencil when he worried, how he had written the dates and names in the letters we found. Tom was careful, I said. He kept things because he saw the future, or feared it. He wanted us to be ready. Neighbors moved closer. Some had their phones up like they were trying to catch a secret in the light. Some simply watched quietly. Mrs. Allen pressed the broom so hard the handle almost snapped. You should have told someone, she said. Her voice was thin with the kind of fear older people carry. You should not keep things alone. The detective nodded and said, we will check everything. For now, we need to secure these papers and the recording. He put on gloves and handled the envelopes like they were living things. Then he looked right at Emily, who had stopped crying and stood up like someone who had made a decision. You're going to have to come down to the station to answer a few questions, he said calmly. Her face went red as she opened her mouth. I did nothing, she said. This is manipulation. She must have planted these. A neighbor shouted, she planted them? In her own trunk. The laugh that came from someone else was not kind. The detective raised a hand. He said, we will see. We need to be careful. He spoke like a man who had seen many sides to a story and knew that the quiet side sometimes held the most noise. I felt something hard and swift move in the crowd. Then a phone held up, a door slammed, the sound of someone running. I looked and saw a young man sprint past Emily and Michael and toward the street. He pointed at something with a long finger like a spear. There's another car, he cried. All heads turned. Down the road, headlights crowded the darkness. A dark sedan rolled slowly toward the house and then stopped. The outline of a man in a suit could be seen through the glass. He stepped out and walked up the sidewalk with a slow, sure step. The neighbors watched him come closer like a wave pulling back the sea to show what had been buried. The suited man walked right up to the detective and said two words that made the detective's pen drop from his hand. Agent Cruz. Agent Cruz. The words landed like a stone thrown into our little pond. The detective looked startled but not surprised. Agent Cruz looked at the envelopes on the driveway and then at me. His eyes were small and steady and held years of work. He took out a small badge and showed it quickly like a flash of sun. Mrs. Hayes, he said, and his voice was polite but firm, these letters and that recorder are now part of a larger investigation. We need to speak with everyone on this property. That includes your son and daughter-in-law. Emily's face went white as tissue paper. Michael took a step back. The neighbors made a sound like a long, low intake. Someone whispered federal, like it was the name of a storm. Agent Cruz looked at the officer and then at the detective. We'll need to take the evidence, he said. And I need to talk to anyone who may have been involved in moving money or changing deeds. I felt the ground under my feet shift. The night had become a world I had not planned on entering. The wooden bird in my trunk felt suddenly like a small lamp in a cave. It had been made by a man who loved me and who had kept secrets to protect us. Now those secrets were not just ours. They belonged to too many people. Emily screamed then. It was a short, high sound that cut through the air. She grabbed at Michael's arm and said one sentence that sounded like a warning and a prayer at once. They can't take everything. We needed that money. Michael's face crumpled. He looked like a boy who had been told his favorite toy had been broken. Agent Cruz turned toward him and said quietly, we will sort this out. But first, I need to secure the scene. Just as Agent Cruz reached for his radio, a car door slammed at the end of the street. Another voice shouted something I could not make out. A second agent stepped out of the sedan and walked fast toward us. He was breathing hard like he had run. He grabbed Agent Cruz's shoulder and spoke 4 words into his ear. Agent Cruz's eyes widened. He turned to the crowd and said, everyone, please step back. There's been a report of forged documents connected to multiple properties in this county. We think this may be part of the same scheme. A hush fell again, heavier than before. People looked at one another with faces that were awake now, no longer half asleep to their neighbors' lives. Emily looked at me with fear and anger braided together. "No," she said. "No, you can't." The agent held up a hand and then, with a steady voice, said something that was both an order and a hint. "We are going to need to search the house." The words hit like a bell. The detective stepped forward and said, "Mrs. Hayes, do you consent to a search?" I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, a loud crash came from inside the house, a sound like furniture being moved too fast and a chair tipping. Everyone jumped. Someone screamed, and in that scream I heard the beginning of something I could not name. The knight had stepped over a line and could not step back. I looked at Michael. His eyes met mine for the first time in hours. There was hurt and something like a question. "Do you trust me?" I nodded, small and quick, like a child confirming a promise. He swallowed and walked toward the front door, where the officers were already moving in. As the door opened and they stepped inside, one of the neighbors shouted, "What are we going to find?" No one answered. The house swallowed the sound. The porch light flickered. The street felt far away. Then a loud, metallic bang echoed from the hallway, one single, final sound, and the lights went out in the house like someone had closed a lid over a small flame. For a beat, there was nothing but the night and the hum of engines. Then a neighbor's phone lit up the porch with a small circle of blue light. Someone whispered, "What was that?" Agent Cruz moved like someone who knew many bad endings and still had the strength to face them. He called out, "Hold position," and his voice carried. But even his order could not push back the new thing in the air, the sudden sense that something much larger had begun. We all stood there on the lawn beneath the stars and waited for whatever came next. The house was swallowed by darkness, and for a long moment nobody moved. It felt like the whole world inhaled at once and held its breath. The porch light that had been glowing warm and steady only seconds before now flickered weakly, then died with a soft pop. The only light came from the police flashlights and the dim blue glow of neighbors' phones. I felt the night pressing on my skin. Agent Cruz lifted his arm. "Everyone stay back," he ordered. His voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made even the loudest neighbors fall silent. Two officers moved toward the front door with their flashlights raised. The beams slashed through the dark hallway like thin swords. I could see dust dancing in the narrow light. I could see the edge of the carpet. I could see nothing else. "Michael," I called out before I could stop myself. But the officers turned and shook their heads, warning me not to follow. I stopped on the porch. My knees were shaking so badly I had to hold on to the railing. Inside the house, something scraped soft at first, like a chair being pushed across the floor. Then came a thud. It was dull, heavy, and close enough to make my heart jump up into my throat. Emily let out a sharp gasp. She clutched her arms around her body, rocking slightly on her feet. "What was that? What was that?" she whispered over and over. Her voice was small, the way a child's voice becomes when they realize they're not the one in control. The detective raised his flashlight and stepped inside. "Hello," he called. "If someone's in here, announce yourself." No answer. Only the sound of the house breathing, with settling, the faint whistle of a draft sneaking under a door, the quiet hum of appliances that hadn't lost power deeper inside. The second officer disappeared into the hallway. His flashlight beam moved across the wall, revealing framed photos, my wedding photo, Michael's school picture from 7th grade, a family portrait from when we still smiled easily. Then there was another sound, sharper this time. A single metallic tap. It echoed in the dark. "Detective Monroe," the officer called quietly. "You may want to see this." Agent Cruz stepped past the detective and followed the voice. His shadow stretched long against the wall as he walked deeper into the house. The neighbors crept closer to the porch, their curiosity pushing them forward. Phones were lifted. Screens glowed. I heard low voices inside, too soft to make out. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together like I was praying. Michael still had not come out. I tried to speak again, but my throat closed. All I could think about was him as a little boy, sitting on the kitchen floor with cookie crumbs on his shirt, looking up at me with bright eyes, asking if he could lick the bowl. I remembered the way he used to run to me when he was scared, his arms wide, believing I could fix anything. Now he was somewhere in the dark and I could not see him. After what felt like hours but was only seconds, the detective finally called out, "We found something." The entire crowd leaned forward at once. "What is it?" someone whispered near the steps. No answer. The officers inside spoke quietly, too quietly for us to hear. Their voices drifted out like broken pieces of a puzzle. "Back room, not supposed to be here, locked from the inside. How long?" Emily stumbled forward. "Michael," she cried. "Is he okay?" "Is he?" "Ma'am, stay back," Agent Cruz snapped. "Do not come inside." She froze, her breath coming out in short, panicked bursts. I didn't do anything," she whispered. "I didn't do anything." The detective stepped out a moment later with a face that had turned pale. He looked at the officers outside, then at Agent Cruz. Whatever he had seen was enough to wipe all color from him. "We need the paramedics," he said quietly. A ripple of gasps traveled through the crowd. I felt my heart drop. "Paramedics," a neighbor repeated in shock. "For who?" Agent Cruz didn't answer. He walked quickly past the detective and into the hallway again. His flashlight beam cut through the shadows and disappeared into one of the back rooms. "Michael." My son was still inside. I stepped forward, unable to stop myself. "Please," I said, my voice trembling. "Tell me what's happening." But the detective raised a hand. "Mrs. Hayes, please stay where you are. We're still assessing the situation." Assessing the situation. Words that meant nothing. Words that scared me more. The paramedics rushed up the sidewalk, their kits bouncing at their sides. They brushed past everyone and entered the dark doorway. For a moment, their flashlights swept over the walls and the floor and then vanished into the back hall. Emily was breathing too fast. "I didn't do anything," she kept saying. I didn't. A neighbor murmured, "Then why are you so scared?" Everything felt sharp. The night was too still, too heavy. I felt like my heart was being squeezed by a hand I could not see. Then another sound from inside the house. A shout. Loud. Urgent. "Found him." My knees buckled. Emily dropped to the porch floor and clutched the railing. The neighbors pressed closer, their phones up, some recording, some trembling. Another shout followed. "He's breathing, but we need to move him now." My vision blurred. Michael. He was alive. The paramedics rushed down the hallway with someone between them, a shadow slumped between their arms. When the flashlight beam hit his face, I saw him. My son. His eyes were closed, his skin pale, his hair falling over his forehead. He looked like a boy again, asleep after a long day. "Michael." I cried out. The paramedics pushed forward. "Step aside," one barked, and the crowd parted like a wave splitting open. They carried him out to the lawn. I stumbled after them, but Agent Cruz blocked me with a firm but gentle hand. "Please, Mrs. Hayes. Give them space." I could barely breathe. "What happened to him?" I whispered. The officer near the doorway answered before he could stop himself. "We found him in the study. The lock was broken. The chair was knocked over. Something was forced open." A cold chill wrapped around my spine. "Something?" I repeated. "What do you mean?" He swallowed hard. "A safe." A murmur ran through the crowd. "The safe. The one Tom installed. The one no one was supposed to know about." The officer looked at Agent Cruz helplessly. "Sir, the papers inside. They're gone." For a moment, I could not breathe. Emily made a choking sound, half sob, half gasp. "No, no," she whispered, shaking her head wildly. He must have." But she didn't finish. Because everyone saw it then. Every eye. Every flashlight. Every neighbor. There was dirt on Emily's knees. Fresh dirt. Dark. Clinging to her jeans. As if she had been digging. As if she had been somewhere she should not have been. As if she had been trying to get something before anyone else did. People began whispering. "Why is there dirt on her pants? Where was she before the police got here? Did she go through the backyard? Did she know about the safe?" The whispers grew and grew until they were louder than the crickets and the sirens, and even the beating of my heart. Emily backed away slowly, her hands shaking. It's not what you think." No one believed her. Not anymore. One of the neighbors stepped forward. "I saw you," he said calmly. "I was walking my dog earlier. You went behind the house. You were carrying something wrapped in a towel." Emily froze. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She looked like a creature caught in a beam of light, cornered, breathless, trapped. The detective approached her. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I'm going to need you to tell me exactly what you were doing back there." Her lips trembled. She took one shaky step backward, then another, and then, without warning, she bolted. Fast. She ran off the porch and into the darkness of the side yard. The crowd screamed. The officers sprinted after her. Agent Cruz shouted for backup. The flashlight beams jerked wildly as they chased her through the side yard, past the bushes, heading toward the backyard fence. Neighbors gasped and pointed. "She's running. She's going toward the woods. Stop her." I stood frozen, gripping the porch railing so tightly my fingers hurt. Michael lay on the lawn surrounded by medics. My daughter-in-law was sprinting into the dark like someone fleeing a crime scene. Something in my stomach twisted. Something old. Something cold. Something that whispered one terrible question. What had she taken from the safe? The night cracked open with shouting. Flashlights jerked back and forth as the officers sprinted into the side yard after Emily. Her shadow flashed across the grass, wild, frantic, stumbling. She pushed through the narrow gap between the fence and the garage, her breath coming out in ragged gasps. Neighbors screamed. Dogs barked. Phones lit up like tiny stars in the dark. "Stop," an officer yelled. "Emily, stop," another cried, but she didn't. She ran like someone who had been holding fear inside her chest for a very long time, fear that finally exploded and set her legs moving faster than her mind could keep up. I stood on the porch gripping the railing, watching the chase disappear behind the shed. My heart felt like it was being squeezed. Michael lay motionless on the lawn, the paramedics working over him with steady, urgent hands. "Pulse is stable," one of them said. "We need to get him to the hospital now," another added. But I couldn't move. I couldn't walk away. I couldn't take my eyes off the yard. Something told me the truth was slipping through the dark right behind Emily. And whatever she took from the safe, whatever she carried with her in that towel earlier, was the real reason she was running. Agent Cruz barked into his radio. "Unit 3, cut her off at the back fence. Unit 4, cover the east side. She may be carrying evidence." Evidence. That word hit me hard. Evidence of what? The officers vanished into the shadows. Leaves shook. Branches snapped. The beams of their flashlights bounced wildly as they closed in. Then, a sudden scream tore through the backyard. A woman's scream. High and sharp. "Emily. Help! Help!" The sound hit every person on that street like a slap. Heads whipped toward the dark trees behind my house. Phone screens trembled. People gasped. Another scream. Then, a loud crash. Like wood splitting. Followed by a rustle and a choked sob. "I can't, no, please." Her voice was shaking. Breaking. I clutched the porch rail so tightly my knuckles turned white. "What's happening?" I whispered. But no one answered. The officers reached the fence first. Their flashlights shot over the boards, slicing through the darkness. Then one of them cursed under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me." "What is it?" another officer asked. Agent Cruz pushed past them and shined his light downward. "Oh my," he breathed. "She fell." A gasp rippled through the crowd. "Fell? Into what?" The officers dropped into the backyard. Their flashlights disappeared behind the fence. A neighbor whispered, "Isn't there an old well back there? From when the property was bigger?" I felt the blood drain from my face. The well. The one Tom had sealed years ago with old boards and bricks because it was dangerous. The boards must have weakened over time. And when Emily ran, she must not have seen it in the dark. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Seconds later, an officer shouted, "We've got her. She's alive. Alive." Relief washed through me like warm rain. But that relief didn't last long. Agent Cruz's voice cut through the yard. "What is that?" His tone wasn't fear. It wasn't surprise. It was something heavier. Something darker. Something that made the hair on my arm stand up. Silence followed. A long, thick silence that wrapped around the yard like fog. "Hey," one officer said slowly, "there's something else down here." My stomach twisted. "No," I whispered without meaning to. "No, no, no." Phones went up. Neighbors pushed closer to the fence. "What did they find?" Someone whispered. "Is it an animal? A body? Another person?" "No way." The loudest neighbor of all, Mr. Thompson, the retired Marine, stood on his toes, trying to see over the fence. His phone light was shaking. "I see. Something wrapped, something big." The officers murmured quietly among themselves. Then Agent Cruz's voice rose, calm but shaking slightly. Everyone stepped back. "This area is now an active crime scene." Crime scene. The words spread across the crowd like wildfire. A mother pulled her kids behind her. Someone dropped their phone. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God," like they were in a nightmare they couldn't wake from. Agent Cruz moved toward the fence again. "I need backup, forensic team, and floodlights. Immediately." Floodlights? Forensics? My heart dropped into my stomach. Something was very, very wrong. The paramedics lifted Michael onto a stretcher. I moved toward them, but I couldn't stop looking toward the backyard. My eyes kept drifting back to the trees, the boards, the dark hole in the ground. "What is happening?" I whispered. The paramedic placing an oxygen mask on Michael shook his head. "We're not sure yet, ma'am. But it doesn't look good." Before they wheeled him away, Michael's eyes fluttered open, just barely. "Mom," he whispered through cracked lips. I grabbed his hand. "I'm here. I'm right here." His voice was faint. "The safe." She knew the code. My throat tightened. "How, Michael? How did she know?" He blinked slowly. His lips trembled. I leaned closer. "She found the papers," he whispered. "Dad's papers, they." But he couldn't finish. His eyes rolled back, and the paramedics rushed him toward the ambulance. I stood frozen. Dad's papers. Tom's papers. Whatever was missing. Whatever Emily ran with. It was connected to him. To my husband. To the safe I thought only the three of us knew about. Agent Cruz's flashlight swept across the yard again. "Detective," he said, "you need to see this." The detective climbed down into the well opening. He shined his light in the hole, and his face went pale. "Dear Lord," he whispered. "What is it?" an officer asked. "What's down there?" The detective swallowed. Hesitated. Then finally said it. "There's a second package down here. Wrapped in the same towel she was carrying earlier." Something icy ran down my spine. "It's sealed," the detective continued. "And heavy. Very heavy." Emily moaned from inside the well. Don't take it, please." The detective ignored her. He reached for the package. But when his hands touched it, Agent Cruz suddenly froze. "Detective," he warned, "don't move that yet." "Why not?" the detective asked. Cruz leaned forward slowly, staring at the towel-wrapped package. Then he said something that sent shivers through every single person on that lawn. "Because whatever's inside, it's not hers." The neighbors gasped. Emily started sobbing harder. The detective narrowed his eyes. "Then whose is it?" Agent Cruz looked straight at the bundle. Straight at the torn white towel. Straight at the faded initials stitched in the corner. "MH. My initials." And then he looked at me. "Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly, "we need to talk." For a moment, I forgot how to stand. Agent Cruz's words echoed across the yard like a bell struck in an empty church. "Mrs. Hayes, we need to talk." Everyone turned to look at me. Neighbors. Officers. Even the paramedics paused as they closed the doors of the ambulance carrying my son away. I could feel dozens of eyes burning into my back, waiting to see what I would say, what I would do. The initials stitched into the towel, MH, looked back at me like a ghost from another life. My initials. My breath felt thin, like it wasn't enough to fill my lungs. I didn't put anything in that well," I whispered. "I didn't hide anything. I swear." Agent Cruz didn't accuse me. He didn't raise his voice. He only nodded, steady and serious, then spoke into his radio. "Bring the package up carefully. Do not open it yet." 2 officers lowered a rope. Another climbed partly into the hole. Emily sobbed in the shadows, her voice cracking with panic. Dirt smudged her arms. Tears streaked down her cheeks. But she wasn't crying because she was hurt. She was crying because the truth was rising up behind her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. The officers pulled up the towel-wrapped package and set it on the ground near the fence. Even from a distance, I could see the towel was old, frayed on the ends, the kind you keep not because it's pretty, but because it has memories stitched into it. Tom had given me that towel the first summer we moved into the house. My voice shook. I haven't seen that towel in years. Agent Cruz nodded. That's why we need to talk. Not to accuse you, he raised a hand when Emily jerked her head up, but to understand how this towel ended up wrapping something hidden in a sealed well. A murmur swept through the neighbors. She must have put something in there years ago. No. What if someone stole it? Her husband built that well cover, right? And the daughter-in-law ran straight to it. Everyone had theories, ideas, opinions. But I couldn't think about them. All I could think about was Tom, my husband, and the night he sealed that well. He'd told me, it's dangerous. Kids could fall in. He'd told me, I'm fixing it so no one gets hurt. He had not told me he put anything inside it. The officers carefully unfolded the towel. Inside was a medium-sized wooden box, dusty and worn, with a brass latch. It was old. Older than the safe. Older than the recorder. Older than Emily. Agent Cruz lifted it with gloved hands. This yours? He asked softly. I shook my head. No. I've never seen that box before. The detective leaned in. It matches the tool marks on the safe in the house. Whoever broke into the safe was looking for this. The safe. The house. Michael unconscious. Emily running. The towel with my initials. Everything tangled together in a knot that pulled at my chest. So, Cruz said quietly, your daughter-in-law was trying to get to this box before we could. Emily cried louder. I wasn't going to take anything. It wasn't mine. Agent Cruz didn't look at her. He looked at me. Mrs. Hayes, before we open this box, I need to ask you something. Were you aware of anything your husband might have hidden? Anything he might have kept secret for years? I blinked. My mouth was dry. Tom kept papers, I whispered. He kept letters. He was careful. But he never hid anything from me. Not like this. Agent Cruz's face didn't shift. He wasn't judging me. He was studying me, trying to understand the way a gardener examines soil for clues. He knelt beside the box. The detective came closer. Sir, should we open it here? Cruz shook his head. No. Too many people. Too many cameras. We open it where it's controlled. He stood, holding the box like it was made of light but filled with fire. Mrs. Hayes, he said, I'm going to ask you to come with me to the station so we can talk privately. My stomach tightened. Am I under arrest? The neighbors leaned in. Emily stopped sobbing. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. Agent Cruz lifted his eyes to mine. No, he said gently. You're not under arrest. You're a victim in this, at least from what we can see so far. But the contents of this box may involve you. And your husband. And possibly things neither of you ever intended for anyone else to find. I swallowed hard. The world felt like it was tilting sideways. Emily suddenly lunged forward, screaming she knew. She knew about everything. Officers grabbed her before she could reach me. She planned this. Emily shrieked. She knew he kept secrets. She knew what was in that safe. She knew what was in that well. Ma'am, calm down, an officer shouted. Emily thrashed, her hair sticking to her face. She put it there. She put it there so she could frame me. I didn't hide anything, I said quietly, my voice shaking but clear. Emily glared at me over the officer's shoulder. Then why were your initials on the towel? Why were you hiding money? Why did you keep letters? Why did you protect him? Him who? I asked. Silence. The kind of silence that feels like a cold hand closing around your spine. Emily's face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Agent Cruz's expression sharpened, not angry, not confused, but alert. Emily, he said softly, who is him? Her lower lip trembled. She looked at the ground. At the trees. At the towel. At me. At the officers. Her breath shook. I wasn't supposed to. But before she could finish, a voice crackled loudly from the detective's radio. Cruz, we have a situation. The hospital just called. Michael Hayes has regained consciousness. And he's asking for his mother. Says he remembers something about the safe. Something important. My heart clenched. The detective raised a brow. So the son knows something too. Agent Cruz exhaled slowly, glanced at the box in his hands, then looked back at me. Mrs. Hayes, he said, the next part of this is going to happen very fast. And you need to be prepared. Prepared for what? I whispered. He hesitated. Then said the words that opened an entirely new door in this nightmare. Prepared. Because whatever is in this box, your husband clearly didn't want the world to ever see. The night felt heavier than any night I had lived through. The wooden box sat in Agent Cruz's hands like it carried someone's last truth, the kind of truth that could change the shape of a family. The neighbors whispered like wind through tall grass. Emily knelt in the wet yard with her hands cuffed behind her, her breath coming in sharp, shaking pulls. This is insane, she kept repeating. She's lying about everything. But no one was looking at her anymore. Everyone was looking at me. And at the towel with my initials. And at the mysterious wooden box Tom had hidden in the sealed well years before. The detective stepped closer. We need to go, he told Cruz. If the son is awake, his statement could tie this all together. Cruz nodded and motioned toward a patrol car. Mrs. Hayes, come with us. You're not under arrest. We need your help. I felt my legs moving beneath me, though I didn't remember choosing to walk. The world around me had softened at the edges, like a memory being written even as it happens. As I passed the neighbors, no one spoke. No one sneered. No one whispered cruel words about being old or weak. Instead, they stepped out of my way with a quiet respect I hadn't felt in years. Emily screamed behind me as I was guided toward the car. You're ruining everything. Do you hear me? Everything. An officer shut the door of the patrol car, muffling her voice. Inside the car, Agent Cruz placed the wooden box gently on the seat between us. Mrs. Hayes, he said softly, before we drive to the hospital, I want to prepare you. I swallowed. My voice trembled. For what? He took a breath. Your husband hid this box where no one would ever find it. For years. And he used your towel, ma'am, to wrap it, which tells me he either trusted you, or he was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? I asked. Cruz didn't answer immediately. Instead, he clicked on a small overhead light that cast a warm glow over the wooden box. It was old. The brass latch was tarnished. Scratches covered the lid, like someone had opened and closed it many times before deciding it must never be opened again. Do you remember your husband acting strange before he sealed the well? The detective asked from the front seat. I thought back. Tom's quiet face. The way he chewed his lip when he worried. The way he stared at the backyard that evening, long after the sun went down. The way he hugged me that night tight, too tight before saying, some things need to stay buried so our family can breathe. My breath hitched. I don't know what's in that box, I whispered. Cruz nodded. That's okay. Michael may know. He was old enough when the well was sealed to overhear things you didn't. He may be the missing piece. The car moved forward, gliding through the dark neighborhood streets. Houses slipped past the windows like silent witnesses. My hands trembled in my lap. When we reached the hospital, cameras were already outside. Reporters whispered into microphones. Lights flashed. Officers pushed them aside as we stepped out of the car. Inside, the hospital smelled like lemon cleaner and something faintly metallic. They rushed us to a private room where Michael lay on a bed, pale but awake. Wires ran from his chest to beeping monitors. His eyes opened when he heard the door. Mom, his voice cracked. Mom, are you okay? I rushed forward and took his hand. I'm here, sweetheart. Cruz stepped closer. Michael, we need to ask you something important. Something about the safe. Michael swallowed hard. His eyes flicked to the wooden box in Cruz's hands. You found it? He whispered. Cruz nodded. Yes, but we haven't opened it. Michael let out a long, shaking breath. I should have told you everything earlier, he said to me. I'm sorry. I thought if I told you, it would hurt you. Hurt me how? I whispered. Michael stared at the ceiling, gathering courage. When Dad got sick, he said slowly, he told me there were things he did when he was younger, things he wasn't proud of. People he tried to help. People who tried to use him. Money that didn't belong to him. Favors he shouldn't have done. Tears gathered in his eyes. He said he fixed it. All of it. He said by the time he married you, he was clean. But he kept records. He kept proof. He didn't want anyone to ever twist the story. He said if something ever happened to him, the only person he trusted was you. My breath stilled. He hit the box, Michael continued, and he wrapped it in your towel because he said you'd be the only one who would ask questions that mattered. Agent Cruz exchanged a look with the detective. What's inside it? I whispered. Michael's grip tightened on my hand. I never saw inside. Dad wouldn't let me. He only told me one thing before he died. He turned his head toward me, his voice trembling. He said the box held the truth of who he used to be and the truth of the people who tried to destroy him. A chill crept up my spine. People who tried to destroy him. People like... My breath froze. Emily's voice on the recorder. Emily talking to someone about money. Emily calling someone him. Michael, Agent Cruz said gently, do you know who your father was protecting your mother from? Michael nodded slowly. And his answer came out as barely more than a whisper. My father said the man he feared most. The man who threatened him. The man who wanted our home. Was Emily's father. The room went silent. My vision blurred. Emily's father. A man I had never met. A name Tom never spoke. A shadow in my home long before Emily ever walked through our door. Agent Cruz's jaw tightened. That matches information we've been investigating. Emily's father was tied to fraud cases years ago. He disappeared. We never found the evidence we needed. He wanted this house, Michael said. He wanted everything Dad built. And Emily, she was supposed to help him get it. My knees went weak. I reached for the edge of the bed to steady myself. The detective spoke softly. Mrs. Hayes, would you like to open the box now? I stared at it. At the towel. At the tarnished latch. At the weight of a secret carried by a man who loved me more than anything. My hands shook as I reached out and touched the lid. A family should know the truth, I whispered. Together, me, my son, and Agent Cruz, we opened the box. Inside were old photographs of Tom, younger, standing with men in suits who looked like trouble. Receipts showing money stolen, then returned. Letters from people begging him for help, people threatening him when he refused. Signed confessions from Emily's father and others. A sealed envelope with my name on it. My heart pounded. With shaking hands, I opened the letter. Tom's handwriting flowed across the page. Maggie, if you are reading this, it means the past has come back. I hid the box to protect you. I hid the truth so our family could have peace. Forgive me for the secrets. But if anyone ever tries to take what is ours, show them the truth. And show them you are stronger than they think. My vision blurred with tears. Agent Cruz closed the box carefully. Mrs. Hayes, this ends here. Your husband's evidence will put Emily's father away for good if he's still alive, and it proves you were trying to protect your home, not steal it. Michael squeezed my hand. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner. I brushed his hair back gently. You're here now. That's what matters. Outside the hospital room, I heard Emily screaming again as officers walked her down the hallway. You don't understand. My father needs that box. My father, he'll find you. He'll kill you. But the officers kept walking. Her voice grew smaller and smaller until it was finally gone. Agent Cruz turned back to me and said, Mrs. Hayes, you're going home tonight. With your son. And with your life back. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. Because for the first time in years, I believed him. My home was safe. My son was alive. My husband's truth was finally free. And the people who tried to destroy us were finally finished.